Boom, we're live for episode 48 with Pete Cameo to start it off.
Pete.
With today's episode, we're going to be talking about TOS because Bill and I kind of noticed that we haven't really talked about that much, so we're wanting to take a magnifying glass to every corner of the Star Trek universe, and with TOS being no exception, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
So, Bill, how you doing this morning?
Doing good. A little tired, like always, but happy to be here and really looking forward to talking some TOS because, like you said, we really haven't done much TOS specific content at all. The motion picture a couple weeks ago was kind of our first dabbling into like those characters specifically. So we haven't talked a lot about TOS off air much.
Have not.
So I don't know a whole lot about your deep down thoughts. So looking forward to talking about it.
Yep. Yes.
How's it going with before we start? How's it going with your rewatch? Like, where are you at?
It's going great. I gotta check where I am. It's weird because I'm doing a weird thing and testing the quality of CBS All Access. So I'm watching it through CBS All Access. So people are wondering if I was going to keep my subscription after Discovery. I am. There's like other facets with CBS All Access. I can watch college basketball, the news, but I'm most using it for watching Star Trek. So I just want to see how that holds up as opposed to Netflix.
How do the episodes look?
They look the exact same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they sound similar, I think, and maybe that's just like a kind of in my mind, but to me they sound a bit different. But I am. Oh, I just watched A Measure of a Man. So I was just, and then also A Code of Honor, I think, or what's
Matter of Honor.
Matter of Honor. Those two episodes, so great. Love those episodes.
That's a good combo.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you think The Measure of a Man is as much of a classic as it's kind of made out to be? Like its reputation precedes it?
Yes, it does. And I knew that going in, and maybe that affects my judgment a little bit, but I knew that this was going to be a quality episode. And I kind of forgot because going into it, I was like, okay, the trial is a major staple of this episode. But I forgot the banter between the Jag and Captain Picard, and it's just so good that those interactions are awesome. So.
Yeah, I really think it's one of the better written episodes.
Yes.
Every line of dialogue, the characters are so just fully formed and like rich and. Every interaction's interesting. Like it's on another level. I think, especially like where you are. Like, is there any doubt that it's the best episode of The Next Generation you've watched so far?
Yes, that's when I knew. I was like, "Yep, this is the one."
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you like Matter of Honor too, you said.
I love that. That's such a fun episode. Not a lot happens in it, but it's just a fun episode. Yeah.
I think Frakes is really good in it.
Yep.
Like his interaction with Klingons is really, really good.
Yeah.
He's super charismatic and I'm glad. I mean, that's kind of like one of the highlights of season 2. Like that 2-episode run, that combo is pretty. Like they're 2 totally different kinds of episodes, totally different tones and styles, but they're both really good. And sometimes that early TNG, it's kind of hard. Sometimes to like string 2 really, really good ones together, back to back, and that's definitely an example of when it happened.
Did you recently start a rewatch? I can't remember.
I might have. Yes, I did. I watched. I started Broken Bow. I started with Broken Bow, of course, last Saturday afternoonish. After we finished our 1-year anniversary stream last weekend, and I got to Breaking the Ice. So I watched the first 8 episodes. If you count Broken Bow, that's 2 of Enterprise. Yeah, it was exciting to be back into it, and you know me, I love Enterprise. I'm always down for some Enterprise.
Yes.
feels good to be back in that time and that universe. And yeah, that first couple of episodes of Enterprise is really kind of unique in the like just the excitement for the exploration. Like I think they did a really good job early on of kind of selling that everything's new and space is big and kind of imposing, and there's a lot of time spent doing nothing. Like in Fight or Flight, they spend a lot of time talking about, man, we've been out here a long time, we're not finding anything. We're just kind of flying through space. You don't get a lot of that in other Trek. So I really enjoy that about early Enterprise. I think they do a really good job of making it feel new and unexplored, and the emphasis is on the right things. I think they were true to the premise of like the prequel and all those elements early on. And I don't know that they stick with it all the way. I'm going to find out as I'm rewatching and kind of looking critically to see how long maybe that tone lasts. But for now, where I am now, like 8 episodes in, it's definitely very much there. Like in Breaking the Ice, the last episode I watched, it's the episode where they come across like the really big comet, and they send Mayweather and Reed over to like get samples of whatever the mineral is on the comet, and they get stuck, and they make a big deal out of like, man, this is cool. Like we're standing on a comet. Like it's everything's just like emphasized as new and exciting, even in that episode. And like I said, just really true to the premise and makes the prequel feel worth doing. But yeah, I saw some good ones. The Andorian incident's obviously awesome.
Yes.
Jeffrey Combs is awesome right away. Shran's the man. I love the twist at the end of that episode. The the reveal that the Vulcans really were being shady.
Yeah.
I think that kind of sets up the whole show, like that whole dynamic with the humans, the Vulcans, the Andorians. That's kind of like the big arc, really, from that kind of comes from here and goes all the way to the end. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I the other thing, just real quick, that I'll throw out there, I remember thinking as I was watching it just this last time, it's not his first scene. Like his first scene's with Archer in the shuttle pod, but towards the beginning of Broken Bow, they cut to engineering and Trip's like running around giving orders. And I thought to myself, like, he might be like, he's not my favorite character in all of Star Trek, but he is in that conversation. Just like the minute I see him, I'm like, God, I love that character so much. Love that actor.
Yeah.
He's one of the best. I just can't get enough of Trip Tucker.
I totally agree. And he like fits in his role so well, just so soon.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't take any time to develop.
Yep. First time you see him in engineering, he's like coming from around a corner. He's like yelling an order. He sounds totally like confident and in command, and totally in his element. He feels right in that role. The actor's kicking ass right away. Like it's awesome. I love him a lot. Like he's definitely in the upper tier of Star Trek characters as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't get enough love.
Yes.
He does. He gets a lot of love when you talk about Enterprise specifically, but I think he deserves more love in like the big picture of like great Star Trek.
Oh, okay. Not just Enterprise, but just like
not just Enterprise.
Okay.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely. Cool.
Yep.
How you doing, Rob? I see you're in here and talking about Jeffrey Combs being great, and absolutely, we agree with that.
Yep.
So our topic of the week is TOS, and the question I'm really interested in asking you, that I kind of just want to start right off. I don't want to like necessarily stick to this topic completely the entire time, but we obviously both like TOS a lot. We're here doing a Star Trek podcast, and we've made it clear in the past that we're fans of that show. But as somebody who came to TOS 50 years, 45 years after TOS premiered, how does TOS hold up as far as you're concerned? Like, how did you do with it in that first time, kind of running through it and watching it as a show? Like maybe not just an episode here or there, but like taking in the show as a series.
I think it holds up well because I think to me what has to be there for anything to hold up over time is kind of the story and kind of the characters and the writing and stuff like that, and I think it does. I think of TOS does have some rough spots, but it does have some great stories and great social commentaries that are relevant today. So I think that's a huge um, reason why it does still hold up today. So
Yeah, I agree with you.
Mhm.
I think a lot of the stories still hold up. Obviously, I think a lot of the social commentary is still apt. Uh, I also agree that it has patches where it struggles a little bit, particularly towards the end. The third season
Yes.
can get pretty inconsistent
Mhm.
and a little weak in periods, like stretches of episodes that are
Mhm.
not really popping. Um, but when I think of TOS, I think of the characters. Maybe first and foremost, like those characters are so classic
Mhm.
television characters, like Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, even,
Yes.
and down the line. I think they stand the test of time. Um, Spock in particular. I think one of the reasons Star Trek exists today still as like a relevant thing is because
Mhm.
of the impact that Spock had on audiences back in 1966. That's what I think helped that show latch on
Mhm.
in a big picture way. Having a character who is struggling with who he is and um, being torn by this side and that side of himself,
Yeah.
logic and humanity and Vulcan and humanity, and not really being comfortable in his own skin, not being able to express himself the way he feels like he
Mhm.
should be, and all of those things are things that you still don't really see in television characters that often today.
Mhm.
Like the dilemma that he presents um, is something that you don't see very often, and I'm sure in 1966 you really didn't see it very often.
Mhm.
So I think Spock in particular is such a landmark television character that he helps that show hold up. I think he's such a successful creation, and Nimoy is so good
Yes.
that um, even the most you know pessimistic of audiences might
Mhm.
find something. If they find something to latch to, it's probably going to be that character and that
Mhm.
actor. Is my guess. And I really do think that's why the show has lasted. I think he's the everything that I've read about like the history of Star Trek and
Mhm.
the uh, the reaction to the show at its inception. Nimoy generated a lot of response, a lot of people really latched onto that character back then, and I think he's what set the show apart uh,
Yes.
as something more than just a typical, not just another Lost in Space. I mean,
Mhm.
there's way more to it than just Spock. The tone of the show, the seriousness of the show, the style of the storytelling was all very different than Lost in Space, which was on at the same time.
Mhm.
Lost in Space is much more silly, much more goofy, uh, much more geared towards families, like young families, kids.
Mhm.
Star Trek's much more of a much more mature show, while still being accessible for kids and families.
Yeah.
But I think Spock really gave it that extra twist, a little extra juice that has made it a classic. Um,
Yeah.
but it,
I totally agree.
who's your favorite character in TOS? I think I know the answer to this. I know he's your favorite
Kirk.
captain. So who's your Kirk?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. Um,
cool.
you mentioned history. I think that for me and things I notice is that we as humans are really fascinated with our history, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek is history. So I think there's a certain fascination that comes with watching TOS, and it's not just like television. It's movies, clothes, cars,
Yes.
anything that we're just so fascinated with our history. I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
also an aspect of why it does hold up because we are fascinated with, you know, the start of Star
Yeah.
Trek.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely a really good point. I think it'd be a really tough thing to argue that Star Trek isn't. I think it is. A show from that time period that has stood the test of time significantly better than its peers. That's a
Yes.
show that people are still watching in a relevant way.
Hmm.
In a way that most shows from that era are not being watched.
Hmm.
So in a lot of ways, that is like one of the more accessible, easily accessed, um,
Hmm.
best shows to like tap into. Life in the 60s kind of. It's certainly a show about the future, and it's not about the 60s, but
Hmm.
there's a lot there that can tell you about the 60s and that time frame when that show was on the air. So
Hmm.
you're right, it's a great way to tap into your history and to feel like you can connect a little bit with a time, especially for you and I, that is before us. You know, we weren't around in
Exactly.
1966,
Yeah.
1967. We didn't get to see it when it was on in first run.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, and that's one of the, you know, you and I are big movie buffs and, you know, big into film, and neither one of us is afraid to go back into the archives and watch old stuff. And I think that's part of it, you know, tapping into that oldness and that other time. And I think that's another thing that I think we have to kind of, you know, touch on with, you know, does Star Trek hold up? I think for people like us, it certainly will, because you and I are used to watching things from the 60s and beyond, you know, further back. Like it's not a really jarring thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it may be more challenging for some who don't expose themselves or just haven't found a reason to go back and watch a lot of stuff from that era of, you know, television or film.
Mm-hmm.
That probably gives us an advantage with the original series,
Yeah.
because it is different. You know, I'm sure, you know, if you watched an episode of TOS and then watched an episode of Deep Space Nine or Voyager or Enterprise and an episode of Discovery, you're going to notice like very different pacing, very different filming styles. You know, the original series is a slower moving show. It's a longer show. The episodes are all 50 minutes long.
Yep.
They're very talky. They're very they're methodically paced, long acts, long scenes of dialogue. A lot of audiences today are not necessarily used to that style of storytelling, and that's not even getting into like the production design of it and you know the limitations that they had to deal with. But I think for people like you and I who like and have no problem going back to old film, old television, there's even some charm to that, you know, seeing how things were done in the 60s and resourcefulness that it took to create these sets and reuse things. And there's definitely a charm to it that I enjoy. A cheesiness, you know, all that's definitely there and a part of the show. And your ability to kind of accept it and embrace it and just make it a part of your experience watching the show is going to be a big key to your ability to, you know, access it and love it. If you can't get there, if you can't, you know, find ways to enjoy that aspect of this show, it's going to be a tough road to hoe if you're not used to that era of television and movies.
And that was my kind of next point, is it does have that charm. It does.
It does.
It does feel like kind of home. Like it's, and that's why I think another, like, I'm just keep adding reasons why it does hold up for me, at least. It does have that charm. I can just kind of pop it on and you kind of get grounded and you feel like home, and it's just, that's why a reason why I like TOS also. But yeah.
Yeah, I it is very homey, and for me, I grew up watching kid, so there's a lot of nostalgia certainly involved there. There's a lot of nostalgia for all these shows for me because I watched them all at different points of my upbringing and being a kid, and so that helps me in a way that, you know, some people are not necessarily going to have at their advantage. You know, they're not going to have that nostalgia to fall back on. So I totally see what you're saying about that, like homey feel to it. That show definitely has that. TNG has it too, but TOS does have that warm blanket feel.
Yeah.
But it's something else that was on the tip of my tongue.
Was it like, what's your favorite character? Because I know you asked me. Mine's Kirk. It's a tough one.
It's tough. You know, the answer's Spock. Spock is arguably, you know, I talk about Picard as my favorite captain and my favorite character in all of fiction. I say that a lot. And he is, but if there's one character who's like in that ballpark, it's Spock for me.
Okay.
For all those reasons, like he's the best, and it's clear. Like every other Star Trek show, pretty much has had a spin on the Spock character, somebody who's struggling with their humanity, and he's kind of set the tone. And he kind of defines what Star Trek is in a lot of ways. Like he's the access point to that thing that Star Trek does. The character who's introspective and trying to answer the question about what being human's all about. So I think he's so kind of definitive to Trek that it's almost impossible for me not to have him at number one.
Right.
For me, but no, I think Nimoy's masterful. Like he's so good at doing so little, and emoting so much. Like all the stuff that's been talked about ad nauseum. You know, the emotion behind the eyes and the stuff that's boiling just under the surface, the loyalty that he shows quietly is stuff that made a big impact on me and kind of shaped how I am as a person, even to this day. Like he's a character that really made an impact on who I am. So it's definitely Spock. And really, he's the first alien in Star Trek. Like he kind of defines kind of like the way Star Trek does aliens.
Yes.
Even like he's such a ground zero. Like he's kind of the Big Bang of Star Trek. He was there in the cage in the very first pilot. Like he's the one thing that survived that first attempt to do Star Trek. His character certainly evolved a lot from that. Like the character that you see in the cage is not really the character that you get later on, but he's kind of the one thing that has lasted the entire time. And really, if you think about it, like he was there in the very first pilot that they filmed in 1964 in the cage, and he's obviously all through the original series, and he's the one thing that lasts all the way into the Kelvin timeline in 2009, and he's in Into Darkness, and he's a plot point and beyond. You know, Spock Prime, you know, dying is like, so he's been such a presence in all of it. He's this major, just cloud hanging over Star Trek the entire time, and even into Discovery. He's not seen, but the whole story of Discovery is about a character who's got a connection to Spock. So it's got to be Spock for me. Why is Kirk your favorite character? Like what about Kirk speaks to you?
I like him because I think he's got the perfect balance between kind of instinct and kind of brains, and that's what I really like in a character is this very cerebral gunslinger, I guess, is what I like in a character, and to me, Kirk kind of embodies that, so that's why I like him, and he's why he's my favorite captain. So
for sure. Yeah, and I love the way you just described that. Like, gunslinger is certainly something that people always tag on Kirk. You know, they say he's quick to shoot and he's instinctual, but he is cerebral too.
Yes,
like, it's undeniable when you watch TOS. Like he's a tactician. He's smart. He's compassionate. Like he's got all that too. And I think some people latch on to like the stereotype, the womanizer. Yeah, people hear all that stuff, and there's elements of that in him, but he's such a more complex character than that.
Yes.
And from a broader picture, I just love the way that TOS is so different than the other shows. Like TOS is really the story of, especially once the show really gets going and you're into the meat of the show, it's really about these three guys, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and like the conversations that Spock and McCoy are having on the bridge next to Kirk about like how to deal with the situation is the exact same conversation that's going on in Kirk's head.
Yes.
Like, it's Spock coming from the logical, analytical, you know, pure brain side of things, trying to be at least, and you have McCoy who's just pure emotion, pure instinct, pure gut reaction, you know, just shoot from the hip, go quick. And they're battling it out, and it's like the it's a personification of what his mental battle is every day. Kirk.
Yes.
And it's none of the other Star Trek shows take that approach. Like the other shows are more ensemble. You know, every character has their role to play, and they're all, you know, a part of a larger piece. Where the original series is so kind of specifically built that way. I think that it makes it a really unique thing, a different kind of show. Yeah, I love that. I love that about Kirk and the other two characters.
It's like you could almost put like an angel and demon on his shoulders.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really what it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're on opposite sides of the captain.
Yeah.
He's in the chair and you got Spock to his left and McCoy to his right, and they're going at each other.
Yeah.
And Kirk's just sitting there listening, you know, taking it in and see him thinking it through, and he's got to make a choice, and he usually finds some way in the middle. Like he finds some compromise, and that's what the show's kind of about in a lot of ways. Like if there's something that you can take away from that show, hopefully it's the need to balance those things and to find the right path through using both. Like even Spock's arc kind of comes to fruition as he kind of comes to terms with the need to find that balance. Like we talked about in the motion picture. By the end of the motion picture, by the beginning of the motion picture, after the original series is over, he kind of goes. He's trying to go the full logical way and kind of purge everything about his humanity out of him. And by the end of the motion picture, he's realizing that it's not the right path. You know, he's got to find that balance. He's got to have he's got to have both. Um, and I think the original series, long before Spock came to that, realization in the motion picture, the original series has been telling us that all along. But that's what you got to do. So, yeah, I Rob saying a few minutes ago, he said he's finding it hard to get into TOS. Not that it isn't great, because it clearly is. He thinks coming from the age of DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, it's hard to move all over to TOS. So that's kind of what we've been talking about. If that's the era that you grew up in, and that's the model of television that you're used to, it is a challenge. It's a tough nut to crack if you're not pre-inclined to that style, and you don't. I think Dan, you and I have like maybe a built-in advantage with accessing this show because of our built-in love for
old
cinema,
stuff. Yeah.
Old stuff anyway. Like it's not that different than popping in, name your classic movie from the 1960s.
Yeah.
We both get. I think we were talking this week about space movies. We were talking about a podcast we were listening to, and I think we both asked each other favorite space movies of all time, and we both said 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is not an easy movie for a lot of people. You show that to a lot of people, and they're going to go, "What is this?" It's slow, it's methodical, it's not for everybody. But our, because we've kind of, been brought up and grown up as people who have loved that kind of thing. TOS is easy compared to 2001. It's an easy watch.
So it kind of leads me into a question that I have written down. Do you have any tips for people going into TOS for the first time, or revisiting it for in a while?
I find that I have the easiest time watching the original series, and I say this about everything. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm like a completionist. Like I like to do things in bulk, like do the full deal. But I do think that watching the original series is probably easiest when you just kind of commit yourself to it and you throw yourself into it and get used to the pacing, get used to the structure of the show. When you watch it in sequence and kind of hopefully just fall into the pattern of it and get used to it, I think it maybe goes down a little easier, as opposed to check out this episode here, this episode there, while you're watching other kinds of Trek kind of in the same time period. If it's going to be a challenge for you, watching it in a way that begs the comparison to Enterprise or DS9 or TNG, because you're watching them back to back, might not necessarily be the best way to go. It might be, I would maybe recommend kind of just start at the beginning, and even if you take your time with it, no need to binge it. You don't have to try to force it down yourself the entire time. But kind of say, I'm going to remove myself from the other Trek for a little bit and just try to get into this flow of this show, and try to get accustomed to, like I said, the pacing of it, the style of the storytelling, the way that show presents itself. Because that's what I find when I'm watching it. When I watch it, when I get to it in the rewatch, I don't even think about it. Like, I just fall into it. Like, it's just not even I don't sit watching it thinking, oh man, I'm watching this show from the 60s. I'm just watching a television show, and I'm watching a show I've seen many times, and that makes it easier too, of course. But it's the shortcomings from a production side of things, and the different editing. I just kind of get used to it. It's the show I'm watching, and it's my experience has told me that watching it in that way is helpful, to me at least. What about you? Do you have any tips?
I have a few. Take it with a grain of salt, especially with production effects. They have taken steps to kind of refresh the visuals in it, which I appreciate. But I also like to see, the classic effects, just because Star Trek has always been the show where it's trying to always push the envelope as far as production and visual effects. So I think that's cool to see, even if it is not very successful compared to nowadays.
Of course. Yeah.
Also, this is just a good rule of thumb for everything. I like to take things for what it is. So when I walk into Pirates of the Caribbean 6, I'm not going to be comparing it to 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm taking for what it is, and I like to focus on the good things in it, because that's what we kind of do here at Trek Live. Is we want to have a positive spin on Trek, so that's what I do when I rewatch. I try to focus on um, the good things of the show, the characters and the story. But also don't be afraid to um, laugh and have fun with it. So, but don't be too critical. No, I'm just
Absolutely.
kidding. Do whatever you want.
No, yeah, like it's important. I think that's a really good point to judge it for what it is and don't compare it to, you know, anything really. I don't think comparisons are good in general. Like just try to take one thing at a time and one show at a time, one episode at a time, and try to judge it on merits. And maybe challenge yourself by trying to watch through the lens of I have to pick an MVP at the end of this episode. Look for something positive. You know, try to keep that positive lens on the entire time and try to find something to point to and say this is the best thing this episode did or this show did. Yeah, no, and I had something else too. There's a lot of things you can do. You know, watch movies from around that period of time. You know, go back and try to get into that time frame a little bit. You know, find some classic movies from the late '60s and try to watch them and see if just getting into that rhythm of that time frame, the way things were shot, the way things are presented, the way pacing is done. You know, like that can only help, and that can only I would imagine if you have any interest in entertainment, you know, movies, television, beyond Trek, I would always recommend that. You know, watch 2001: A Space Odyssey if you dare. Like if you are ready for a real challenging experience, that's rewarding if you're, you know, if it works for you. But there's all kinds. You know, go back and look at, you know, lists of classic movies. Look at the AFI list. Look at the Academy Awards from those years, and you know, find something that speaks to you and it sounds cool, and pop it in, and you know, and that way, if you're gonna watch TOS and you have something you want to compare it to something of its contemporary, like compare it to something like that, something that was made at the same time, and instead of trying to compare it to things that were made, you know, 10 years ago or 20 years ago as opposed to 50 years ago. Compare it to something that was made at that time, and that's why I think TOS is so great, and that's why it's the classic that it is. Because if you do compare it to particularly television from the late 1960s, like I said, there's no comparison. Like Star Trek is clearly over. I think time has told us that it's clearly the best television show that came out in that period of time. Because there just aren't shows from that period of time that are, you know, that hold up in that same way. Like people aren't watching Gunsmoke. I don't think in bulk and like huge numbers
or making podcasts about it.
They can. I'm sure there are podcasts about it. Yeah, but they're certainly not like Trek. You know, there's not countless podcasts about Gunsmoke out there, and people talking about it like it's a new show still, and people discovering it and going back to it. So Trek has clearly stood the test of time in a way that most of its contemporaries, most of its peers from that time have not. So while I wouldn't necessarily recommend going back and watching television shows, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. But finding movies, finding whatever that does come from that same period of time, and just to give yourself a point of reference from that period of time can only help.
Yes.
And the other thing that I tend to do real quick that has been on the tip of my tongue, I keep losing it, but I better say it before I do again. And I've said this before on the show, is from the production design side of things, and you know the obvious, you know, limited budget and you know, cardboard sets and stuff that people always talk about. Like in my mind, when I watch it, one thing I do tend to do, especially when it's more challenging, when it's more obvious that the production itself hasn't necessarily held up very well, is to try to look at it like you're watching a stage play. You know, like make your mind's eye do a little extra work and fill it in. You know, that it's an interpretation. It's minimalist. You know, there's more supposed to be there, but they just couldn't do it for you. So your mind has to do a little more of the work, and you know, let your mind's eye take over a little bit and connect some dots, and you know, make things a little bigger. And you know, I do tend to do that. I've taught myself, I think, to let myself do that when I watch the original series, and I found that it helps to watch it with that mindset.
Yep.
That it's more of a stage play than it is to be taken literally. And it's meant to be taken literally. What about I posted this on Twitter, and I don't know if you saw it or came prepared to talk about anything like this, so I might be putting you on the spot a little bit, and I do that a lot. So sorry.
Yeah.
What Spectre of the Gun? Yes, that's a perfect example of minimalist and
Yeah.
maybe having to, but even that one you don't even need to. Yeah, Enterprise Extras here, Jim. Welcome as always. Spectre of the Gun is one that obviously uses that to its advantage. You're not supposed to expand. It's meant to be. It's intended to be minimal and half created. And
Mm-hmm.
they reference it in the story. They make their production limitations a part of the story, which is really awesome. But I asked people on Twitter if you were going to try to introduce somebody to TOS. And again, this is difficult because you're not aiming it at a specific person necessarily, just general person, whoever. Are there episodes that you think would maybe give yourself the best chance of success with trying to latch somebody onto it?
That's tough. I don't know if I have like good episodes. Okay, we're back. I think I'm having internet issues right now. I didn't come with like a list of like episodes, but I can give some of my favorites. It's tough because like as far as introducing Trek, like I have this issue with, do I want to just give them the classics and give them the best? Do they expect that, or do I want to find like a good combination of kind of middle of the road, solid episodes? Or do you want to just go just straight with the home run and give them that? It's tough, and there's episodes that I love that are middle of the road, but there's also episodes that I love that are like nobody likes. But that's what's great about Trek. So for me, if I were to introduce someone to TOS, I would do like 3 like general, like maybe not so good episode, middle of the road, and then the City on the Edge of Forever. So you have this full array, this full spectrum, this full gamut of episodes that you can get the gist of TOS or Trek in general.
I love that point because I've struggled with that when I've tried to show somebody Trek. Like do I go right to all of the classics, like pick the best of the best, and then make somebody think that this is what's going to be every single time out, and that might not be the best approach. And of course, I did a podcast with Jim, who's in here. My first time on Trek Ranks was pick your 5-episode marathon to introduce somebody to Trek. And the TOS episode that I picked one from each show, and the TOS episode I picked was the Doomsday Machine, because I think the action adventure is an easy thing for people to latch onto. That's an exciting episode. But now that I think about it, in hindsight, we said, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it in that way, maybe that's like a false impression. The Doomsday Machine is such like a unique, like in some senses it is like it's a good example of TOSs because the characters are so alive. From the character interaction standpoint, like Kirk's really active in it. Obviously, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, they're all like very involved in the story, and I think that's a good taste of like who these characters are, and it's a good representation that way. But it's such a unique animal as far as the action adventure side of it.
Yeah,
maybe it's not the best way to go. Maybe it's setting somebody up for disappointment that they think, man, every episode's going to be the Enterprise doing battle with this big thing, and it's not. That's not usually what it is.
Yeah, I think it's tough because like you don't know how, and maybe you know this person really well, but you don't know how the people will react to the episodes. There's plenty of people that like I'm a huge example because like I like episodes that people don't, and other people like episodes that I don't. So that's what's great about Trek. So you don't really know how they're gonna react. So
exactly,
it's tough.
That's true. You don't, and that's part of the challenge, I guess. That's part of the difficult. Like I had a hard time with that podcast with Jim, with coming up with a marathon, because really the marathon would be based on who I'm trying to aim it at. Like hopefully it's somebody that I would know, and somebody who's has taste of a certain type. Knowing what their favorite movie is and other TV shows that they watch, that's going to help me build that list. So the challenge of that project, that marathon, was to pick something general that could theoretically work on just about anybody. And yeah, for somebody, I might show the Doomsday Machine to one person, but I might choose, something like The City on the Edge of Forever, or Trouble with Tribbles with somebody else. The Trouble with Tribbles is something that's like super charming, and the cast is really involved again. Like everybody's got stuff to do. It's funny, it's light. You get to see the characters kind of like in a less stressful, kind of day-to-day grind of the job, being in space, being in the Federation, kind of deal. Like that might speak to somebody more than the Doomsday Machine would. So it is, a lot of it is about knowing your audience and trying to aim something at them that's going to make them interested and want to keep coming back to it. The outside the box choice might be, because I think it's been proven to work on many occasions, is not even a TOS episode, and it's not even a TOS movie really per se. It's maybe the way to introduce somebody to TOS is Star Trek 2009. There's especially if
that's
they're
a great point. It's a great point.
I mean, there is such a legion of people out there, yourself included, who are interested in Trek and maybe became more interested in Trek because they saw that movie. And I think that really works because the characters aren't exactly the same, but you get the archetypes, you get who these characters kind of are and where they come from, and you get a feel for who they are, and hopefully it makes you interested in getting more of that world and getting more of those characters. So that's another, I think, valid choice to maybe ease somebody into the original series. So
yeah.
What is, I didn't, kind of a different spin on this question. What episode to aim at somebody? Do you have a favorite TOS episode that just comes immediately to mind?
Oh, that's tough. The City on the Edge of Forever is probably up there. The Arena, I don't know why. I love that episode. Devil in the Dark.
That's great.
Yeah, I think those few. It's hard to nail down one, but it's those for sure. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's The City on the Edge of Forever is my favorite episode of Star Trek in general, which I've talked about before. I think it's got it all, like everything that you could want in television. I think is on display in that episode, and I think it's Star Trek at its best. But beyond that, Devil in the Dark would probably be my number two. That's an amazing episode of Star Trek. I think that's Jim's favorite of all time. Certainly his favorite TOS episode. It's just a perfect example of what Star Trek's all about. But another one that I always kind of go back to, it's a very frequently cited classic. People talk about a lot, is Amok Time. Spock, Ponfar on Vulcan.
Yeah.
There's stuff in that episode that I think, again, just really defines those characters. Jim had an episode of Trek Ranks a few months ago, the turbo lift scenes. And I wasn't on that episode, but I did share my episodes on. My number one pick was the scene in the turbo lift between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. When Spock's kind of telling them about what's going to happen, they're going to have to go down to Vulcan, and he can bring his closest friends. And of course, he's telling Kirk, "I want you to come with me." And then he says, "I also want McCoy to come." And McCoy just says, "I would be honored, sir." Yeah. Like it's just a great scene. Kind of just tells you everything you need to know about these three characters, and what their relationship is, and what the whole dynamic is. So that's another one that I think would work as that like introduction episode. But I think it's one of their very, very best too. But that's the thing with TOS for me is like it can be a little inconsistent at times. Like they're a decent number of episodes that are misses to below average. There's some middle of the road stuff, but when they hit, like they're classics. Their best of the best episodes are some of the best of Trek history, of course. Like the ones I just named. You can go deeper. You can go Mirror Mirror. You can go, the Menagerie. You can go the Trouble with Tribbles. The Corbomite Maneuver. Space Seed. Like there's just this long run of just classic after classic. The Enterprise incident in season 3, I think, is fantastic. There's a lot that really hold up well and are real classic pieces of television. So I think there's a big bench of top of the line Star Trek episodes that come from that show.
What you can say about anything about? You could say that same statement about any other Trek.
Sure.
Maybe
Oh yeah.
besides Discovery, I don't know. We might
Hmm.
be a little biased about that, but
Hmm.
yeah,
Just out of not enough content to do that quite yet.
yeah,
But yeah, no, I mean, but to be honest, I think if I went back and looked at my tabled rankings for now, the ones I did a few years ago that I'm trying to avoid looking at because I'm trying to do it anew with this new rewatch. But if I went back and looked at it, I'd probably say that 7 or 8 of my top 25 episodes of Star Trek of all time are maybe TOS episodes. Um, it's those. It's City on the Edge is one, Devil in the Dark, Mock Time, the Doomsday Machine, Mirror
yeah.
Mirror, The Menagerie. Like these
Hmm.
episodes are up there for me, like way into the upper, like 0.25% of Star Trek episodes. Uh, and that's why like when people do ask me, what's your favorite Star Trek show, and I answer statistically, TOS is the answer. Like if I'm answering statistically based on the episode grades that I gave last time around,
Yeah.
the show with the highest grade point average was the original series, which is amazing because there are so many runs of kind of maybe some non-classics, particularly in the third season, and maybe even a little bit into the back half of the second season.
Hmm.
But there are so many like solid A's, especially in that first half of the show, that it lifts that grade point average up a lot. Right.
Yep. Yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but when you rewatched or when you watched everything, you kind of went through one show at a time. TOS was the last one you watched, right?
Yep. TOS was the last one. Yep.
Do you think that was a good move?
I think so. It put me in this type of lens where I was kind of viewing it, kind of comparing it to the past Trek I've watched. So maybe next time, my next rewatch, maybe I'll start with TOS and see how that
Everything builds off of it.
everything builds off of it. I have even this second rewatch, I have been seeing things that link back to TOS and stuff like that. So it's you definitely can go both ways on it. Mm-hmm.
Jim's asking us what elements of the show do we think hold up. We talked about that at the very beginning a little. Like just to kind of recap here, as we're coming up on an hour and getting ready to wrap it up anyway. I think in the next little bit. For me, the trio of the three main characters, that entire relationship is my favorite element of the show, and I think that holds up beautifully. But another thing that really I think makes TOS the best for me, like such a great show, is that maybe more than any of the other shows, I love that almost never ever does the antagonist of the show become like a mustache twirling, simple, being bad just to be bad villain. Like in their stories, there's always more to it than that. You know, the adversary, the thing they're up against is always more complicated than just I'm being bad to be bad. Like you find out that they're just misunderstood. It's something we don't understand. It's something that, and often we do come to understand by the end of it. You know, like the core maneuver is obviously like the first example that comes into my head that, you know, the entire time they think that they're dealing with this horrible creature that's going to annihilate everybody and is completely antagonistic and is not to be reasoned with. But at the end of the day, it's obviously way more complicated than that, and there's friendship to be made there and a new relationship to build. And the TOS as a whole, if you go to any episode of TOS, if there's a person, a villain, you know, even Khan in Space Seed, you know, they treat him. He's certainly badass and he's a problem, but they treat him with like a level of kind of respect at the end, obviously by doing what they do with him. They kind of come to terms with him and treat him like a human being and give him a chance. And I just love that. I think that holds up because it's different and you don't get that in TV or in film very often. Like, you know, I just saw Tomb Raider as like a side note of a movie that I didn't like very much. And part of the reason that I didn't like it is I think it fell into that trap of they built this bad guy to be just a bad guy. Like there's no reason for him to be bad other than we need a bad guy. He's your classic, just mustache twirling. Like I'm a badass just to be a badass. I have to be a thorn in Lara Croft's side. And the original series just never does that. They never go that easy way out. Like there's always more to build on. I love that about the show. And I don't necessarily think that, you know, a lot of other Trek up to and including Discovery does that too, but I don't think anybody's done it as well as TOS has, and nobody's stuck to that kind of rule as wholeheartedly and as consistently as TOS did.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the show was going to be. It wasn't going to be about good guy versus bad guy. It was going to be about people coming to an understanding, entities coming to an understanding. And at least if you can't make friends with them, you go away from them with an idea of what it was that got you into that boat.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What about you? Like, what elements do you want to recap a little bit about? Like, what?
We talked about kind of the charm, just the charm of TOS for me. That's what kind of holds up. I don't know if that was just that maybe builds over time. We kind of talked about the historical implications of Star Trek TOS. It was such a groundbreaking show in many ways. Yeah, those are kind of the big things for me. Obviously, the story and things are still being talked about that were kind of commentated on in TOS are still happening today. So that's what I like about TOS also. A lot of things. But
yeah, and Jim makes a really good point. He's talking about the bridge design. And I think that's, while people might be able to poke holes in the 50-year-old production design from like how well was it built from a physical standpoint. Oh, it looks like it's yielding when people like touch a wall or something.
Yeah,
that stuff you can certainly do that if you want, but I don't think there's any doubting that like the design work of the props, of the bridge design, like he's saying, like sickbay, like the engineering set, like for what they could do, for what the capabilities that they had were, it's gorgeous. Like the sets are amazing for based, given what limitations they had and what kind of resources they had to work with. The bridge design is iconic and obviously set the tone for what a Star Trek show was going to look like and for what a lot of science fiction was going to look like for the next 50 years. So, Matt Jeffries, the production designer on that show, is, a legend and is as important a Star Trek figure as there is. So yeah, couldn't agree more with that. I think for all the holes people poke in the production design, I think it's a strength of the show. If you can look beyond the, the material elements of it. And look at it from a more broad angle of, what's the design? Look at the props. Like what's cooler than like that TOS phaser? Like find me a
the communicator too. Even like the smallest little things, like the design is so cool.
It is so cool.
Yeah.
Everything's so sleek and and obviously it built, it's no new ground being broken here, but like, technology certainly built off of things that were introduced in Star Trek, and cell phones are obviously
flip phones
flip phones, that's all out there, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that because it's been talked about many times, but like there's no denying that's all production design. That's Matt Jeffries and his team of people that worked on the show that I think is an undeniable strength of the show and does hold up if people are prepared to look at it that way. If you can look beyond, like I said, the materialistic, just what's that set made out of? Like, pay much attention to that, and you'll see the goodness to it. No problem, Grappler. We'll be back next week.
Yep.
There's always more to come.
Yes. We're just glad that you could kind of pop in for a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
Speaking of next week.
Next week is to be determined for
now? To be determined for now. Like we got a few things that we got in mind that should be pretty fun.
A couple things in the pipeline. If certain things line up, we might do one thing, and if things can't quite come together, we're going to go a different way. So keep an eye on Twitter. We'll announce the topic of the week in short order. Hopefully maybe by the end of the week and early into the week, we'll know exactly the direction we're going to go in.
Do you have any podcasts that you've been listening to this week?
I do. I listened to an amazing episode of Earl Grey over at Trek FM. They interviewed James L. Conway, who's a director on that show. He directed on TNG. He directed Justice, The Neutral Zone, and Frame of Mind. So that was kind of like the main talking point. They talked a lot about those episodes because it's a TNG podcast, obviously. But he also directed a bunch of episodes of Deep Space Nine, The Way of the Warrior, for one. He directed Broken Bow, the pilot of Enterprise. He talked a little bit about 37s on Voyager and Death Wish on Voyager. Like he covered, like they did a really nice job of touching on all kinds of shows, different kinds of episodes. And he's the recipient of a very prestigious Trekkie Award at least once, memory serves. He's a Trekkie Award winner for Broken Bow. for Best Director. He's one of my favorite Star Trek directors because of the different styles of episodes he was able to do. Like Frame of Mind on one end of things, and like it's just completely off the wall and insane. You'll get to it in 4 or 5 seasons on your rewatch. And Death Wish is like this really cerebral, talky courtroom drama with Q and Voyager, and The Way of the Warrior is this big production with Klingons and big earth-shattering developments for Deep Space Nine. Broken Bow is like this huge production too. Like he's done it all. He's got all these kinds of episodes and really versatile. If you dive into like Star Trek directors, he's definitely a prominent one. And it was really cool. I love hearing interviews from people like that who are like involved with like the day-to-day grind of the production, not necessarily like the actors and people we've heard a lot from, and different different kinds of things like that are pretty commonly people that we hear from. And I just, anytime we can get interviews from people who are on that side of things that don't necessarily get all the love, I'm all for it. I couldn't listen to that fast enough. They did a great job.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list to listen. For me, there was a fun To the Journey episode. They kind of talked about doomed Voyager relationships, which was fun. Which was fun to listen to. Also, a non-Trek podcast, Cinemaholics. They do movie reviews and stuff like that, and they have like a sub show of. Anyway, that's all I got, and it's just such a fun show. Those guys have a great rapport, and I definitely recommend if you like anything with movies or just to have fun. So it's definitely a very funny episode, and it had me cracking up at work. So
yeah, I can attest. I listened to it too. You got me onto that. They did one a couple weeks ago, I think, this week on their favorite space movies.
Yep,
it's a really good conversation, and they did one. The one I just listened to yesterday that you're talking about is an episode about, they're talking about movies that they watched with their families.
Yeah,
some good, some bad. Like some good experiences, some bad experiences.
Yeah,
movies that they were forced to watch because mom or dad or somebody, cousin, put them in front of the TV and made them watch it. And it's just a really fun. Like they have really good camaraderie, really good chemistry.
Yeah,
really good sense of humor. So that's a really good non-Trek movie podcast for sure. One other one, I'm not sure if you're caught up on it. He's in the room. I feel compelled. It's 100% true. I'm not just blowing smoke, but the Trek Ranks episode on best scenes in a shuttlecraft was really, really good.
Yep, very good. Very good.
Yeah, a lot of really good stuff. I shared my list on Twitter, so check that out. I picked a lot of standard stuff people were definitely hitting on, but I think I found a deep cut in. I picked a scene from Enterprise in the Council when they're coming back from, it's T'Pol, Mayweather, and Trip. No, T'Pol, Reed, and Mayweather in a shuttle pod. And they had lost a Mako on this mission, and Reed's freaking out. He's upset. They keep losing people, and he feels like they're losing too many people on this mission in the Expanse. And T'Pol gives him this pep talk about the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and he didn't die in vain, and this mission's important. And it's just a kind of a classic Star Trek scene where T'Pol's given this, all the Vulcan goods to kind of reel him back in, and there's all this good subtext to it too, because T'Pol's going through all this stuff with the Trellium addiction. She's got her own baggage that she's dealing with, and she's able to pull it together and bring Reed back in. So I thought of that immediately, actually, when I saw the topic. That was an episode that really automatically kind of popped into my head, because that's one of my favorite scenes in Enterprise. But that's a really good topic. There's all kinds of really good stuff in that. Kind of creative picks, deep cut picks, and a lot of good conversations about the stuff that's probably popping into your mind right now if you haven't listened to it and just heard the topic. So highly recommend it.
Yes.
Cool.
Well, all right.
Cool. Anything else? Anything you want to throw out there?
I don't think so. You guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. Come over to Twitter, Facebook, Discord. Bill and I chat in Discord sometimes, especially when we're going through this rewatch. So definitely head over to Discord. You can get on your phone, on your computer, anything. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's basically an instant messenger that we're kind of always on. And I'm not a really good, especially, I kind of want to appreciate you reminded me, but like I'm not a good live like tweeter. Like I don't like tweeting as I'm watching stuff. I like to kind of keep my head in the game while I'm watching. So, but I am trying. I'm going to try to, post a thought here or there as I'm watching in Discord and for the people, the handful of people that are in there hanging out. So if you're so inclined, definitely head on over, download that. I'll throw the link in our comments again, and install it on your phone. Just kind of hang in there, and if there's a conversation worth chiming into, it's always available to you.
Yep.
Cool.
All right, guys, that's been episode 48 of Trek Live. We'll be back next week, probably same time, possibly some STO tomorrow. So look forward to that, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.
Yep. Thanks for watching. Thanks everybody who stopped by.